warm welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the final session for the Disaster Risk Knowledge in the Pacific peer learning sessions. So today's session is collaborating to develop risk information, including community perspectives. Very interesting session. The main theme for today will be around collaboration and working with community. Now, as we get started, I want to hear a little bit from everyone in this room. I think all of us have different holidays. Some of us have very different holidays that are celebrated in each of our communities in each of our countries. And so I'd like you to tell us about a special holiday in your country. So a holiday maybe that no one else has in your country. Go ahead and introduce that holiday into the chat. I'd love to hear, what is a special holiday in your country? Okay, brilliant. Thank you for introducing some new holidays to us. So just a few reminders as we get this session started. Keep your mic muted while we have other speakers speaking. We invite you to ask questions and such, but while we have other speakers speaking, it's very helpful if you can keep your mic muted. You're welcome to send questions to the chat at any point in the session, and that'll help us kind of figure out what are some questions that we can use to get started some of our Q&As and our conversations. And you can find the raise hand button if you'd like to make a point or to ask a question under reaction. So at the bottom of your Zoom window, if you click reactions, you will find the raise hand button there. Now, we've already kind of talked about the background of the peer learning sessions. I think that this is going to be a great session with some learning from different regional experts and people who've done very practical work in this space around engaging communities and collaboration. But I just wanted to highlight that the participants who complete the program, so today is the last session, will be receiving their certificates. Now, session 3 for today, we will focus on two key goals, right? One is developing a shared understanding on the value of country collaboration and risk information. And two is identifying the types of collaboration that are working and what collaborations are needed to make risk information useful and effective. And I think part of this is we're going to host a sort of a plenary discussion with all of you later in the session. Part of this is also to see, are we starting to see potential maybe or interest in collaboration across some of the different people who are here in today's session. Now, the structure of the session, we're going to start with a panel discussion on meeting local community needs. We've got 3 people who will be speaking on that. I will let Litea introduce them. We're going to follow that with reflections. They can be your reflections. We have a discussant also who will be sharing. And then to have a plenary discussion amongst all of us on working collaborations and risk information needs. And then we'll wrap up at the end. So we'll have Stuart come in and help. We'll have Litea help sort of run this piece of the program, and then we'll have Stuart coming in and helping us do that plenary discussion. And speaking of Litea, I would like to hand the floor over to Litea Biukoto, who is a team leader for disaster risk at the Pacific Community and is based in Fiji. Litea, over to you.
Thank you very much, Cal, and Bula, and welcome to everyone. As Cal had said, we've got quite an exciting lineup today. First off the block, we'll have some words of reflection from Molly Nielsen, from the Assistant CEO for Disaster Management in Samoa, who is going to be followed by Tautala Mawala, the General Secretary for the Samoa Red Cross Society. And last but not least, we also have Harry Mumud, who is the Disaster Services Manager of the Open Mapping Hub, and this is supported by the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. As with the other events, what we'll have is also a discussant who will following the panelists. And the discussant we have today is my own colleague, Eileen Turare, who is the project manager for the Pigrafi project being implemented by the Pacific Community. Now, before we deep dive into some of the information that's going to be shared by our panel, would really like a moment for you to share with us a question before we start. And your questions can actually relate to community-based evacuation planning approaches, or what is the value of community mapping and disaster risk information, or specific questions around community-based risk assessments in the Pacific. So if you're not aware, I can actually see people attending this panel, and I might actually call you out so that you actually type in questions into the chat box. Okay, so I mean, a question that I would have is, how does someone, how can my work actually help with some of the community-based approaches? You know, how can we actually start to develop information that can actually be used to guide some of the work that's being done with communities? If you really don't know, I'd also be quite interested to know that too.
I think what we can do is we can give people some time to think about their questions as the session goes on, Lute, and perhaps we can head over into some of the presentations.
Okay, so I've got you guys all on check now. So first up, we have Molly Nielsen, who is going to be sharing with us some work that the Disaster Management Office have actually been leading in Samoa. And, you know, this is on community-based evacuation planning. Now, Molly is actually going to be joining us, is actually not able to join us physically. So she has a pre-recorded message for us this morning. Thank you.
Aloha everyone, greetings from Samoa. Molly Nielsen of the Disaster Management Office. My sincerest apologies for not logging in live due to competing schedules. But I am tasked to share on Samoa's community-based evacuation planning. So in Samoa, we have two programs on the community level. One, we have the Community Disaster and Climate Risk Management Program. This is a village-based program. Two, we have the Schools Disaster Preparedness Program, and this is a school-based program from the early childhood education to colleges. The implementation of these programs are guided by toolkits that have been developed. Moreover, we work in collaboration with government agencies and non-governmental organizations. For the village-based program, there are 4 objectives. One is to conduct risk analysis consultation with communities to identify the risk the communities are exposed to, as well as vulnerability and capacity assessment to identify appropriate actions to mitigate the risks and lessen the impacts of future disasters. So for tsunami maps are developed for each village based on the tsunami zoning hazard map for Samoa that has been established. The evacuation routes and safe location are identified before installation of tsunami signs. Number 2, we formulate the village response plans that identify the community structure and coordination mechanisms on which the communities will act on in response to any disaster. Then we train village disaster response teams within the village that will respond during and after a disaster. The village response teams consist of teams such as coordination teams, shelter and management teams, protection teams, response teams, search and rescue teams, warning teams, as well as damage assessment teams. And then we simulate those plans. So we conduct simulations to test the reliability of these plans, as well as the knowledge of the village teams on their roles at the various stage of disaster risk management cycle, which is preparedness, prevention, response, and recovery. So the program is basically community driven, with the intention that at the end of each program, the community maintains a sense of ownership, not only with regards to their village response plan, but also on the coordination role in response to any future disaster, as it will greatly promote collaboration with the government and improve overall national response to any disaster. So the programs takes on an inclusive approach whereby all members of the community, including women, youth, and people with disabilities, are involved in conducting of the above assessments and tasks. The school's disaster preparedness program has the similar implementation objectives. So the intention of the office is to implement these programs to all villages and all schools of Samoa. I have shared to Stuart examples and photos of the maps, which illustrates evacuation routes for villages that has undergone these programs, and schools based from the tsunami zoning map, and some photos. Please, if you do have questions, I'm sure Stuart and Litia will take on question and send over an email, and then I'll do my best to respond. Thank you for your attention, and keep safe and all the best. So far, so far.
Fafte lava Molly for that, and I thank you for the reminder that that the engagement with the community needs to not just be inclusive, but it also needs to be wholeheartedly undertaken with them in the middle of that process. Next we have a slight change to the delay. So as we're going through these panelists, may I please ask that you just keep note of some questions that you may want to actually reflect on and share back with the group or with the panelists concerned. So without further ado, I'm quite happy to actually introduce someone who's actually not new to this space, Totala Mawala, and Tala will actually be discussing the community-based risk assessments in the Pacific on vulnerability and capacity that she's been involved in. Naka.
Thank you, Litia, for the opportunity, and Talo for each and every one of you. Following up from Molly's presentation, and this is where Samoa Red Cross comes in as an auxiliary partner of our government in the humanitarian field. The CDCRM program that we run in the community, Samoa Red Cross is the implementing agency where we co-opt relevant stakeholders and ministries and organizations to present to the community during the CDCRM program, their roles and responsibilities in disasters. And by doing this, we're actually all coordinating our work in ensuring that we leave behind the skills and expertise with members of our community so that when disasters happen, they will be the first one to respond. And by going out into the communities, we have to firstly do assessment, vulnerability capacity assessment. And this assessment includes the households. Firstly, we go to all the households to make sure we identify what their vulnerabilities are, what the capacities they have, because all of these can contribute more effectively into the training, the 1 week-long training program that we will be running with villages. And it's always good to know what their needs are. And by doing this, or before we even go in to do trainings, we walk the village with all the village mayors, the village representatives, the women, the men, the youth, to help with the mapping. This mapping will enable the villagers to identify what we mean by hazards, where the hazard areas are in their respective villages, as well as identifying evacuation routes up to whatever evacuation sites they will identify for the whole villages to move to when disasters and the impacts of disasters happen. So it's a week-long program, and what we have gathered, especially after years of driving this program into the communities, there is a lot of work to be done through the translation of the technical information that are brought about by the ministries and agencies that are coming in to train villagers on the respective response and areas of response that the villagers will be included in when disasters happen. And this is part of Samoa Red Cross work, not only looking at and analyzing the vulnerability capacity assessment results and outcomes so that villagers know how to go about drawing up their disaster plans that we will be given back to them so that they can respond more effectively when disasters happen. But we have to make sure they understand what we're saying, in terms of disaster risk reduction. What is that in their own words? What is understanding of what climate change adaptation is? Because a lot of time, our villagers have been really into these activities, day in, day out, throughout their lives. And we need them to really understand the value of what they're doing in their daily lives. They all contribute to one way or another into ensuring community resilience as well as effective response when disasters and even emergency happen. And this is where the value of vulnerability capacity assessment in the communities come in, as well as making sure that effective response happen when disasters and emergency arise. So we are also learning about their traditional knowledge, how they had gone about identifying what they see, the risks, and how they predict that there's going to be a cyclone or so forth, because it's so important that we maintain the respect for that knowledge and have it linked to what the scientists are saying, so that everyone works together in harmony and ensure that all the resources, expertise-wise, technical-wise, are counted, into our disaster risk management program. I will be able to add more to this, after this session, and I'm sure, there will be more of that to be shared with our group. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you for just reminding us that the communities aren't just the beneficiaries, that they're also the first responders, and the need to engage them in these types of assessments. Our final panelist is Harry Mahmood from the Disaster Service Manager for Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Mapping, Asia Pacific. And Harry actually joins us from Indonesia. Vinaka, Harry.
Hey, hello everyone. Can you hear me? Hello?
Perfectly.
Okay. So something happens with my camera, but let me share my screen if that's okay. Okay, so I will going to share my screen to all of you. So good morning, everyone. My name is Hari Mahardika. I'm from I'm a disaster service manager from Open Mapping Hub Asia Pacific. And today I will share with all of you about the community mapping in disaster management through OpenStreetMap. So can anyone confirm that you can see my slides now?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay. So I'm from Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, an international NGO that dedication to humanitarian action that focusing on open mapping activities. And in the Asia Pacific, we established last year to engaging more people in the region to using and support the OpenStreetMap mapping movement in 25 countries, including some of the countries in the Pacific. So before I start about the disaster in focus, I will share about a little bit about OpenStreetMap. So OpenStreetMap basically is a Wikipedia of maps where all of you can contribute on it, and you can also not only see the data, use the data, but you can also contribute to the map. So you can map your own area, and it can be together with everyone, and it can be also becoming one of your source of geospatial data. And all of these data in OpenStreetMap actually can be used in a wide range of activities, including in disaster management. The next question is why in Open Mapping Hub, it's really using OpenStreetMap as one of the, our movement in our work. And why is open and participatory map is important in the context of disaster. So I think all of you can, already know about how important the community roles on disaster, because we know that every disaster always begin and end locally. So as a local community, as a citizen, we have something that maybe other groups doesn't have, which is our local knowledge about our area where we're living. So we really know what's the places and the critical infrastructure that might be useful in the context of disaster. So by capturing these and sharing these local knowledge into the maps, so we not only can make something meaningful in the context of contribution and disaster risk reduction, but we also in the process we as a local community will be becoming more aware about our area, because we know what's the dangerous places, what's the safest places around the area. And together with all the sectors, government, local community, people, we map together our area, and we try to make our area becoming more resilient of disaster. So this is one of the example in the context of OpenStreetMap. So as we know, OpenStreetMap is a participatory mapping. So we know that in some areas, because disaster doesn't really, consider they just want to hit the cities or they just want to hit the rural area. So disaster happens everywhere. So imagine if there is an area that's not really well mapped at the moment, or even not really mapped at all. So there is no activity that we cannot do without the data. It's been also explained by Molly and Tala about the mapping importance to define the good policy and strategy in the context of disaster management. So if you have a map, so you can have a good analysis about what might happen and what you should do in the future. So adding local knowledge into the map, you're not only having your buildings and roads, but most importantly, you can adding your local information that could help the local community, the local government to create a better policy and better planning. And this information can be shared and accessed by everyone. So the more you contribute, the more complete, the more comprehensive local knowledge that you can add into OpenStreetMap, the high detail of your analysis, and it could be lead to the better policy and planning. So this is also one of the another example of how OpenStreetMap it's can be used in the context of disaster. So we're focusing on completing the exposure data because we know exposure data it's really critical information. So let's say you have a tsunami or flood in your villages, for example. You should know like how many schools will be affected, how many hospitals will be still open, and where are the safest evacuation center, things like that. And OpenStreetMap can help you to keep those information updated and can be also, like I said, one of your source of the geospatial data. And if you do have created your hazard data, OpenStreetMap data can also be integrated and overlay to create a disaster impact scenario using another free and open source tool. So you can know in the future what's the how many schools will be open and like how many people will be affected and so on and so on. And also it can be used for help you to decide what's your next policy and planning in the future in the context of disaster management. And I will a little bit share about the community collaboration in the Asia Pacific. So at the moment, Open Mapping Hub Asia Pacific has been collaborating with two local community in Pacific, one in from Fiji and second one is from Kiribati. So at the moment, we giving some of the collaboration with the OpenStreetMap Fiji. So they have created several activities, such as mapping and using hot tools to do the field mapping data collection. And they have like created more like 70,000 buildings digitized in around the country. And also they collaborate with the local government, with the local community to use OSM data and to improve the use of the data in the particular areas in Fiji. For Kiribati, so they also have been established last year. So we collaborate with them to empower the local community, especially the women here, to also know understanding and know about more technology, especially in mapping, and define their area and collect their area and mapping their area. So we can work together if Open Mapping Hub here we can help you to teach you how to use OpenStreetMap and also connect you with the communities that we have been working on, and especially in the Pacific, and also integrate your data and information that you already have. So last but not least, this is some of the links that I have put, so you can take a look at later on, so you can learn more about OpenStreetMap. Thank you for this opportunity, and we will having some discussion, I believe, after this session. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Harry. I think the graphics that you shared actually bring together what the previous speakers have been talking about around not just participatory approaches, but also using local knowledge and insights to actually start to define better those risk and vulnerability maps that are being produced. So this is actually we're pushing back to you now, and when our three panelists have been the ones talking over this past half hour. So we'd really like to get from you if there was any questions or any comments that you may have to the panelists. So maybe I'll start. Maybe Doug, if you'd like to Yes, okay, thank you.
Okay, Vinakula here. I really only asked the question because I was scared you were going to call us out and make us ask one. I guess I've been involved in over the years many kind of community kind of hazard mapping kind of exercises, more less so for emergency evacuation, but more for kind of, I guess, kind of village planning and development planning and things like that, and can totally understand the kind of how powerful that is about the communities developing their own hazard maps and developing their own kind of responses to those risks and vulnerabilities. I've also been in plenty of situations where us science kind of people have come in with some very sophisticated modeling and hazard mapping and things like that, and presented that to communities, and often not getting, probably not going above their heads is the wrong way of kind of putting it, but really not kind of, getting the understanding in the communities of what those kind of, scientific approaches to mapping is done. Now, I was just kind of reflecting in the 20 or 30 years I've been involved in the Pacific. I can only remember being involved in one situation where we've really pulled together community approaches to hazard mapping and also kind of scientific approaches to hazard mapping. And this was some work that we were doing with SPC, with Latea's colleagues in Manaya in the Cook Islands, where we mapped cyclone run-up on Manaya and used the community knowledge to really kind of calibrate the model in real time in the workshop, which gives them confidence in the modeling. And then we looked at how that could, those hazard kind of run-ups, the coastal inundation run-ups would kind of change with different climate change scenarios, and what buildings would be kind of affected kind of over what time and things like that. So I guess that was a long-winded way of saying, kind of how can we actually better integrate kind of the knowledge that's held in communities and the hazard mapping, kind of the community level hazard mapping, with some of the techniques that we can bring from the science community.
Thanks, Doug, for that. I might actually get maybe 2 more questions in, and before we reflect back to the panelists. Yuta?
Yeah, thank you very much. Similar to Doug, it's easier writing a question than just being put on the spot. But I keep wondering, what's a good frequency or time frame to actually update existing risk assessments, whether it is in communities or in general, and how to make the decisions to either start with something new and do an additional community, or update something which exists already. So really, essentially as well, where or how are priorities decided in the end? Thank you.
Thanks for that, Yuta. Stuart, did you want to throw in with yours?
Yes, connected, I think. My question is really around what specific factors do the Red Cross focus on when they're assessing vulnerability? So what types of resources, and are there any factors or resources that you think are specific to Pacific cultures that affect vulnerability and capacity that we might not consider if we're translating approaches that we've applied, say, in Central Asia or Africa across to the Pacific? Thank you.
Thanks for that, Stuart. And I might actually just go straight to Tala first. And she's also got her hand up. Over to you, Tala.
Yeah, thank you, Litia, and thank you, Stuart, for asking this question. It's very important, but when Red Cross goes out to do household assessment, usually when we go to the community will come to us, in a hall or in a community huge place. Red Cross, through its filling gap role, ensures that if we go to all the households, we will have a good picture of the most vulnerable people. And by going there, VCA-wise, we make sure that we look at vulnerability of our households in terms of water supply, their homes, the shelter, how safe it is, communication, how they communicate, with each other within the village or outside when there's disasters. How do they do that? As well as looking at what they have, do they have a plantation of food? These are the capacities, what skills do they have? And a lot of time, the vulnerable people that we tend to dwell on, that status, have a lot of capacity that we need to harness or even look at best utilizing to make sure that, it also boosts their self-esteem, knowing that the skills that they have, we don't have. Everyone has different skills. And this is where we go in. We have to make sure that water and sanitation is okay, their health environment is okay. If there's any disabilities or people living with chronic illnesses, people living with HIV, you name it. All of that information needs to be collected, because we know that when disasters happen, their impacts will further make them more vulnerable. And we need to do something before any disasters happen. And doing this, it's pre-work, that before we even enter the community, we have to know the status of that community and the people that live in. And this is why it's very important that we do assessment and analyze results before we even go into the community. And like what Molly was saying, since the tsunami, the government has established assessments, of all the village communities. You must have had copies of all of these. And we know that there's evolvements, there's changes from time to time. So we still take that database or baseline data, by government, and we take it with us and go out there and see what difference they have made. Are there any more homes that have been built since the past one? Have they, because 70% of our country live on the coastal areas. And the training that we provide make them realize that they're even living on the hazard zone. They're living and they need to move inland. And that has been part of the infrastructure by our government, because this is a work that we do together, making sure roads are going inland so that people can move away from the coast and go and live inland. And I think this is the value of assessments, pre-assessment, vulnerability capacity assessment. A lot of our women can weave mats. A lot of our men can fish and plant taro. And these are the capacity that if they put into good use, it will help with nutritious food, earn living, and so forth. And then they will move away from the vulnerability status that people keep turning, to name them by.
Thank you, Talo, for that reminder. We often only think about vulnerability in the context of disaster risk or climate risk, and often sometimes it's actually ensuring that the basic necessities are actually accessible by communities. Harry, I was wondering if I could reflect to you around the integration of community approaches to hazard mapping and scientific approaches, and and how that actually comes about, if at all, with the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you. So in OpenStreetMap, so when we teach people, like I said, we teach people how to not only in the technical aspect to map into OpenStreetMap, but we also gather how they can really collect the something that they really know for so long, like a local knowledge, into the maps. So we can help them to, like I said, like what is the really critical objects that they really want to put on the maps in the context of disaster, so it can help them to to plan better. So in some of our activity, we absolutely not working alone. So we collaborate with local government, we collaborate with the Red Cross, with another NGO. So they are the one who defining what's the best information and what's the best object that they want to put on the maps, and how they can really gather on this. And in the context of scientific approach, so of course, in OpenStreetMap, we can, using another open source tools, to integrate the OSM data that will be used as exposure data into the other open source tool that designed using scientific. So in this case, we're using a tool called INASAFE. So this can be create like I said, disaster impact scenario. So it's like combining like a community approach that put into OpenStreetMap, and with the data that comes from the scientific approaches, which is risk data and risk maps, and overlay to create more, comprehensive and scientific result about what the future disaster impact scenario. So this is a new kind of approach because this is a planning. It's not based like assumptions, not based like a historical, but it's more like you said, it's more like a scientific approach and based on the local knowledge of the community, because we use the data that have been collected by those local people in that particular areas. I hope that answers some of the curiosity.
Thank you, Harry. I'm sure there's going to be, space to actually expand this. Do this post this event.
Yes, sure.
So we didn't leave. So we have in the program a discussant who is going to actually speak a bit about the work that the project she's on is implementing, around risk assessment under the Pacific Catastrophe Risk Assessment and Financing Initiative, as well as some of the standards that they're using around data collection. So without further ado, Eileen Turare, the project manager for the Pacific, for PCAFIB, as well as some of the other risk assessment initiatives that we're currently implementing in the region. Naka Eileen.
Thank you so much, Litea. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. So just a bit of a background on the project itself. It's phase 2 of what was initially started in 2007. And it's working with, at the moment, 5 different countries to collect exposure data for risk assessment. So we've started, in the beginning, we had meetings with the countries to come together and agree on standard attributes that we could use in these exposure surveys. And that was put together in 2019 and 2020 to then develop an exposure data collection form that we're now using in the field. And we'd be happy to share that with anyone who would be interested in that. So just an update on the data collection. So far, we've done data collection in Tonga, currently doing data collection in Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, and yet to be agreed upon with government is the data collection activity in Cook Islands and Samoa. In these different countries, we're working with the different ministries, either Ministry of Finance or Department, Ministry of Internal Affairs or the NDMO. But I think just to reflect on the things that have been shared so far with the different panelists in terms of experiences in the field in data collection, definitely communities are interested in what data is being collected about their areas, their homes and so forth. And they are interested in what the government is doing. So there is, I think, a lot of potential to close that gap in terms of what happens at the national level and what happens at the community level, and definitely organizations like the Red Cross, INGOs and so forth are critical in that aspect. With regards to the traditional knowledge that was mentioned, I thought that was a really good point. In a case in point, an example in Vanuatu that we found was a building, their traditional building structure that they used for cyclone protection. And so that was something good to capture in the data that was collected about the buildings. also the casing point about the work that the Red Cross does in terms of knowing where are the water points, how is communication done. This is exactly the data that is being collected with regards to the assets that the teams are collecting on the ground. And so I think the next step from that is the use of the data and determining risk profiles from that. And that's where the team is working towards that. I think the other link that I wanted to make that was mentioned is the partnership with OSM. PCRAFI has actually partnered and had a couple of activities with Fiji OSM in terms of the digitizing of the maps that were used, that is now being used in the field. And so that's definitely a really good partnership, and it will be great to see that OSM chapter open up in the other countries in the region. And I think that is a way forward. And definitely there exists that partnership between government and the community level bodies. So yeah, I think that was just my quick reflection. There is a lot of opportunity for collaboration and partnership between the national and subnational levels, as is already exemplified in the presentations that have been made here. Thank you, Litea.
Level, Eileen, for that. I think there's definitely been some valuable insight shared here, but also some opportunities for the Pacific Island countries in actually expanding the baselines that they have, the data baselines that they have, as well as building on existing. I am going to now shift over to Stuart Fraser, who's going to take us further with some plenary discussions and work with you.
Yeah, thank you, Litea, and thanks for the questions and responses and reflections so far. I think this plenary discussion will focus a little bit more on the types of collaborations that are happening at the moment, and also touch on how risk information can be most effectively presented and communicated. So coming back to some of the things that have been presented already, but perhaps showing or bringing some examples to the fore, and maybe some ideas and thoughts that people have had that haven't been implemented yet and could be more effective or implemented to make projects more effective in the future. So I wonder if we can just go to the next slide, because we have a slide with the question on there. Perfect, thank you. So we have about 30 minutes for this discussion, maybe slightly under. So we'll spend 10 to 15 minutes on this question. We're looking for people to speak up really and provide those examples, just so we can share some best practice of what collaborations have been successful so far, to bring community perspectives into risk information. So we've heard from Tala the household surveys that have been carried out. Are there collaborations where communities are producing their own assessments of vulnerability, for example? I'd be interested to, looking through the participant list, I'd be interested to hear from a few different perspectives. So not wanting to pressure anybody, but Celia, it would be great to hear if there's certain collaborations in lands and natural resources, and Rohit, anything we can learn from health services and the municipal council level, collaborations that you have that exist already to generate data, that we could be leveraged in terms of generating risk information. So I wonder if anybody wants to raise their hand or drop a comment in the chat to get things moving, that would be fantastic. Or perhaps while people are thinking about that, Harry, could I come back to you? ask about the community mapping. And Eileen just mentioned, I hope that OSM chapters could open up in other countries. And I wonder how many people have worked with OSM previously, or used the data from OSM. But I wonder what modes of collaboration hot OSM have found to be most successful in the past, whether it's in the Pacific or beyond.
Yeah. Okay, Stuart, thank you. So I think I can give you an example from our previous activity with the community in the Philippines and also in Indonesia. So with this project, we collaborate with local disaster management agency, both in both countries, to provide like a critical lifeline infrastructure, and later on it can be used and integrate with the government platform, and to be seen like I see. So OpenStreetMap basically used for exposure data. So the government have like a risk data from their own work, and those data from OpenStreetMap combine with the government data, and government can really see, for example, if the disaster happens, how many buildings will be affected, how many people will need to be evacuated, and where is the safest route, things like that. So OpenStreetMap, for us, we just help people to map, and also to teach local people how to use the map or how to map. So the data can be integrated with the like existing information platform that already used by the government, for example. So I think this is the point of collaborations. So we're not saying that OpenStreetMap is the only reliable data sources. Instead, OpenStreetMap can be a really good alternative for your data where you cannot really find the comprehensive data elsewhere. Because one of the challenges in all aspects, I think, including in disaster, is about how to find like a really good information that we can be used for disaster planning, management planning, right? So we have a community, we have a people here that living in the area for years. So how if we can really collaborate with those local community and put those kind of local knowledge into the maps, and the maps later on can be used to help not only in disaster but for any purposes. But in the context of disaster preparedness, for example, you can get the data, and the government can get the data, the university can get the data to create more better analysis, like I say. So in Open Mapping Hub Asia Pacific, we try to engage people to know about OpenStreetMap. We teach people how to map in OSM, to put their local knowledge. So later on, they can independently working on their own. They can collaborate with their own local governments, just like we saw in Fiji at the moment, and now we doing in the Kiribati and in the other countries. So maybe in the chat box later, Stuart, I can give you some of the video links that to see more about our activity in Indonesia and the Philippines, so people can get better understanding about what we are doing with the government and collaboration with them in context of disaster risk information.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Rohit, you left a comment in the chat about past experiences in Fiji, mentioning huge complacency in communities and potential engagement in planning and risk assessment. Do you, from your experience, do you see a way to overcome this complacency within communities? Do you think collaboration in developing risk information can overcome that complacency? I wonder if anybody has comments about how we might overcome that complacency. Celia, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Stuart. I just wanted to share some successful experience between the Ministry of Lands and previous project, although it wasn't focusing on disaster. But the main point is we did make a successful collaboration with the communities, and I guess a successful collaboration with the community starts with a strong relationship with the communities, because when you have that strong relationship, the communities will feel being heard and being involved, and feel the ownership on whatever programs that the government or any other project is trying to implement, and therefore they will respond in a positive way by being involved and helping out with whatever activities. So I think that strong relationship is very important. The actual project that I'm referencing here is a Pacific Ridge to Reef program, also implemented under SBC, and 14 different countries within the Pacific, Tonga being one of them. And one of the principles of this Pacific Ridge to Reef or R2R is stakeholder engagement. So there are different strategies and different ways on how to engage different stakeholders and including the communities. And one of those strategies is having a good and strong relationship. And this is translating it into practical ways, is to actually not just to show up to the community when there's something that we need, but we need to make sure that we involve them in all phases or all stages of work. Also including in that strong relationship is the inclusive approach that we've heard earlier from the panelists. I think that's a very important point. And we actually included not just looking at community members, but also people who are in leadership position, such as the people's representative in the parliament, to church leaders. We even reach out to youth, and if there's one of the things that we did was we realized in this community that we were working on, the youth weren't really involved in community activities. So we made a partnership with the people's representative and other community leaders, and we established a youth council where we, and this was the basis of engaging youth from the 15 different villages within this district that we were working with. So yes, I just wanted to share that with the group. Thank you, Stuart.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, it's I think it highlights the importance of connecting with multiple partners on the ground. Too often, maybe we focus on the disaster management authority and bring fewer kind of civil society organizations into discussions around the use of risk assessments, and perhaps we need to kind of spread our communications wider throughout the projects to make sure we're producing information that's useful to a wider range of people. In my experience, lots of international organization projects have not in the past, let's say, collaborated, but rather put an emphasis on producing technical outputs and then presenting that to the recipient of the risk assessment. But I think things have changed in recent years, and there's much more recognition that we need to engage users of the information, contributors of valuable information that can help produce a more robust and reliable set of risk information. We need to engage those people from the beginning of a project and build trust and understanding throughout. And then we'll hopefully have more success in applying the risk information towards the end of the project. If we move on to the next question, so I think we can segue at this point into the communication of risk information. And you know, Doug raised a question on this earlier around how we can better integrate community and scientific approaches. But I'd like to focus for the next, say, 10-15 minutes on how we can more effectively present risk information and communicate it to communities to maximize the impact. And by maximizing the impact, I mean make it more useful, make it usable, so that it can be, you know, people can take practical action on the basis of it. I wonder if anybody's got views on risk information they've previously received as a member of an agency or ministry or community, or seen communities receive information that they don't particularly know what to do with until it's translated. Tyler discussed this earlier about this translation, and Tyler, I wonder if you could get this discussion going. I was quite interested to understand what particular types of technical information you found most important to translate into I guess more understandable terms, and which types of information have posed the most challenging, or are most challenging to translate and make useful from your work.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, I think this is very important, and we have seen value of ensuring communities understand the technical information that we are giving out. The classic example for this is the weather bulletin. You know, like 3-4 times a day, the weather bulletin will come out. And the perception of our communities to the weather bulletin, a lot of time they just ignore it. Ignore it of the fact that they don't understand what the weather people are saying, ignoring of the fact that all that the community anticipate is there a cyclone coming our way. You know, they actually looking at what hazard, you know, is coming on, so that they can start preparing. Hence, the not understanding the weather bulletin will also cause a long wait or constraints of time to respond. Working with WMO and our meteorological office here in Samoa, we have further discussed on this issue, because it was something that was identified during the community disaster and climate risk training program that we roll out to the communities. The weather people will come on and do their presentation, because we are co-opting people from the ministries, you know, to provide what they're doing in disaster preparedness. And we see that from the impact, I mean, the response of the people, they don't really see, well, I can safely say that, the value of understanding the weather bulletin. For example, you know, if the weather people are saying that there's a cyclone in the vicinity of Samoa, 300 miles, you know, from from northwest coming to go, coming through to southeast, something like that. We know there that there's very little understanding of that technical information. So through translation, we do a post, showing east, west, south, and north, and then, points of all the other anchors from there, so that people know where east is, because around the community, they have different directions for east. All they know is the sun rises from the east and it sets, to the west. So they don't have the same direction around the country, but they need to understand where certain directions are, so that when the weather bulletin speaks of an oncoming cyclone, for example, they would then, start preparing. A lot of time, cyclone-wise, they should understand the speed of the cyclone, that it is coming for so many miles. And that is very technical, because, all that our community would await is, is it affecting their home? Is it here? Are the trees starting to fall and so forth? And this is also why, they just go out when the cyclone is above us. And then that causes a lot of loss of lives, because they should have exit proactively, before the cyclone, if they had understood what the weather bulletin was saying. One aspect that we have known, that the cyclone that was coming towards Samoa is now moving to Tonga, for example. When they hear that, they said, oh, it's okay, we're fine, it's moving to Tonga. And not realizing that part of that cyclone is still above Samoa, anytime it can move back. So this is an example of the manner by which cyclones move, and the technical information that is sent out, and how our people perceive it, and if they can respond or not. And it's good that we have realized this, because we really need to ensure that they understand the value of the weather bulletin, because this is why they read it out 4 times a day, so that they know that they need to respond very proactively before anything happens. Even if it's flooding, too much rain will make floods and also, all of that. And at the same time, we learn from their traditional knowledge, because before all of these systems that we're talking about, people were surviving, surviving a lot of disasters in their time, especially our elderly, and some are still alive. So we need to learn from them, how they had predicted that there was going to be a cyclone or rain or so forth. And this is, I was going to, really linking up to the collaboration that we were talking about. In Samoa, we have a National Disaster Council, which is actually the cabinet, and this is government. And the Disaster Advisory Committee, which makes up of all the heads of ministries and NGO like the Red Cross. And this group advises the cabinet of what is going on, what needs to be done for their approval, for everyone to move. And the ministries that deals with the community is the Ministry of Women, Community and Social Development. So when we go to the community, which makes up of government reps, which is the village mayor, the woman representative, the youth representative. These are the community people in every community. And these are the people that we work with. Before we even go in, they have to make sure that people are involved before we come in. So this is about inclusion. Through the base of protection, gender and inclusion, it encompasses everything, because while we are there, we have to make sure those people hear about everything and how they can go about with their preparations before anything happens. And that is such. So the collaboration with our community-based population and people out there is so close. After 1 or 2 weeks that we are there doing household assessments before we do training and drills and write up their plans and so forth, we become very, very close with each other. And for this time, while we are speaking, our DAC, Disaster Advisory Committee, is meeting because we have a next door volcano in American Samoa that may happen anytime from now. And we are going back to our villagers that we have trained, because we need to activate their plans, whatever their plans say, so that they can be ready at this point in time, whatever may happen. Those people that have been trained under the emergency response teams in those communities need to work their role and responsibilities that they have agreed and committed to doing. And this is all about being proactive, before anything happens. Why we tend to look at our communities, because they are the first responders anyway, before Red Cross and all the other agencies come in. These are the people that got the brunt of everything. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tala. There's lots of very good points there. And coming back to how we communicate risk information, I think your point on essentially using where the sun rises to know directions, I think we maybe take for granted the use of maps and overlaying or plotting where hazards might affect different places on maps. And sometimes I wonder whether presenting a map and leaving that with a community is actually a useful thing, or whether that map needs to be translated in some way so that can be related to the reality of the local environment and where people live. And actually, I recall some research from some years ago where volcanic hazards were mapped on not just a map as we would think of it as a flat aerial map, but onto an image of a volcano where people could identify different ridges in a 3D image, because it made it more understandable and relatable, and people could locate themselves within that image and as a result understand the distribution of the hazard and the potential hazards at different locations around that volcano. So I wonder if there's some thinking to be done around the communication of hazards and risks on maps. So so 3D community mapping exercises. Would you be able to provide some more information about those? That would be interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would have to go back and do some search and research, actually, but I do remember very well, because I found it so fascinating, that there were reports, and maybe Litea remembers as well. Sorry, Litea, for putting you on the spot. But there were reports, actually, that communities were literally building 3D models of their communities with kind of like the hills and slopes and rivers and so on and so forth. And but it's been years ago, probably 10 or more or something like that. And I was very impressed and fascinated, but I'm not sure where that has gone. Happy to follow up.
Yeah, thank you. P3D GIS.
Glad we have another acronym.
Yeah. And I do at various events, you sometimes see 3D models set up so people can look at how hazards are manifesting and taking shape in different environments. And I remember recently seeing somebody had built a Lego model of a town to demonstrate how, I think it was tsunamis could affect different parts of the town with different structures and management plans. I don't know if people think that kind of practical approach of building kind of tactile models of areas might be a way to communicate hazards and risks more effectively than providing, say, a PDF with 2D maps. whether that's something that should be pursued in the future. It seems that some research has been done on that, but not particularly used too much in practice. Does anybody have any other points that that maybe reflect on the types of risk information that we produce in risk assessments and that are maybe not very understandable at face value or provided in a report that could be communicated in a better way? Celia, I see your hand again, Celia. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. In my experience with the community here in Tonga, I think a lot of it will be very useful to have different ways of presentation of the information, whether it's a map or a report or a little video or a model, a 3D model being simulated. And this is because different, not everyone will easily understand one form of presentation. Different people will learn through different ways. But one thing that is very important here in Tonga when we deal with the community is to actually be there in the community and to host a community consultation where even though there are maps and there are reports and there are videos, but to actually talk to the community face to face and to explain this different presentation face to face to the community, and to be present in case there are questions, and just to really make sure that you speak their language and to make sure that they are actually absorbing what we're trying to get across and to communicate to them for maximum impact. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. A great point. We shouldn't put all of our eggs in one basket when we're trying to communicate this information. Doug, I see your hand. Thank you.
Yeah, I think just to add to Tala and Sila as well, there's no one methodology for doing that, and it's also not just a case of turning up once into that community and presenting kind of information. It's that long-term kind of engagement with that community that's important. So, not everything will be kind of passed over on the on one meeting, but it's about having that long-term engagement with that community. I guess interesting thing we did in New Zealand, and this is about 10, 12 years or so ago, we were looking at how there was good coastal management kind of outcomes in coastal communities here that were affected by erosion and inundation. And it was identified that we had much better kind of sustained outcomes where we had the involvement of the local community, the local council, and the technical experts all in the same place over a period of time. If there was only two of those kind of involved, the outcomes weren't nearly as effective. So if there were only the community and the technical experts, the outcomes weren't nearly as effective. If it was just the regional council and the community, the outcomes weren't nearly as effective. It was the council and the technical experts, the outcomes certainly weren't nearly as effective as they would be if all three were involved over that long term. So I think, in addition to the multiple ways of kind of communicating kind of risk, and, Tala mentioned kind of something that's really important, that just walk over with the community, that walk over with the old men, with the women, with the youth, kind of often all separately, because you get different perspectives on that, the different ways of presenting kind of information, but also that longer term kind of engagement and that involvement with everyone that needs to be part of that discussion, both within the community, but within the kind of institutions and the technical experts as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that I think that summarizes quite a lot of the issues quite nicely. I wonder if that's a good place to halt our discussion and wrap up this session and the series, because there's a few things to kind of go through in terms of finding more information and things to look forward to in the future. So thank you very much for all the insights from the panelists and in that discussion. So what we'd like to do in the wrap up, we'll hear from Litea again in a minute. I have a few logistical points before I pass back to Litea. We, at the beginning of the peer learning series, we asked a series of questions around level of awareness and use of risk information, etc. And we'd like to request that the participants fill out a post-series survey or post-session survey, so we can see, try to gauge kind of the impact of these discussions on people's knowledge. And this will help us design future series. You know, it's not designed as any sort of test, and it's anonymous, but it will help us understand the benefits and how well this series has worked. So Gabby has just posted a link to a Google form. It should be very, very quick to fill out, but please do answer the questions in that form if you wouldn't mind. That would be very useful for us. In terms of things to look forward to as outputs from this series, we'll be publishing a summary of the discussions and the key points that have been raised through the whole series, so the 3 peer learning sessions, but also the public event that preceded it. You'll be able to find that on the series website. There's a long URL just there. Maybe that can be posted in the chat while we're talking. But that's the main page for the full series at the ADB website, and that has the video for the public event and some supporting resources, including that published summary, which will be out in a number of weeks. We've also mentioned throughout the series this certificate of completion, and the team at Tandemic who've been supporting this series will be processing those for people who've attended these peer learning sessions. So look out for that dropping in your inbox. And ADB have been planning or thinking about a series of in-person knowledge events along the same lines around risk information. So really this one's just the start of the conversation, and hopefully we can start to plan some in-person events within the region and continue these discussions instead of via Zoom, but in a room together, which would be a refreshing change. I've already mentioned that the post-event evaluation form, the Google form. If you missed the link in the chat, then that will be included in the closing email as well. And my final logistical point would be if there are questions or comments and other feedback around the series, things you'd like to look forward to or like to be included in the future, please don't hesitate to email Alexandra or Marissa at ADB on these addresses. They'd be delighted to hear feedback and ideas for related events. And my final word would be to just thank Litea for moderating this session and for supporting the development of the concepts of this series. It's been invaluable having SBC and Litea in particular contributing to the topics we plan to discuss, and bringing in some of the excellent speakers and lots of expertise into the panels that we've hosted, and also helping us identify people to invite as participants as well. So thank you very much, Litea, and I'll pass over to you for the final wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. And we wouldn't have been able to pull off this learning series without all of you. And from the team that's actually helped put this together. Thank you for staying through the 3 months of 3 months of this series. We've had 3 specific learning events with a big launch. I hope that you've all, you've taken away with something from this, taking something away with you, but also an opportunity to build on. And through this journey with the opening event, we had some really great key speakers who set the scene for this. And that followed through with discussions around, what was some of the innovations in the region around disaster risk knowledge. We got to hear from work that was being done across a number of countries by new and SPC, but as well with the work that the UNDP were doing with the government of Tuvalu. And I think I better stress here that these collaborations are actually collaborations with counterparts in countries. This is not work that's being developed externally and then basically being produced and delivered. The discussions in the last event, which really talked to how risk information was actually being used to drive investments by governments, and how it was actually being taken up by the private sector to develop and build business continuity plans in the event of a disaster. The basis for good planning, is good quality information and good quality data that underpins it, and that's been throughout the 3 learning series. The 3 events that we've had through this learning series. Today brings us full, really the crux of it, which is, communities aren't just the recipients of risk. The importance of not just curating and developing risk information, it's actually working with your target, with the aim of actually producing and communicating what it is that's key. So Samoa's experiences that they've had, through the way that the government interacts with civil society organizations into communities and vice versa. The opportunities that came about through through OpenStreetMap, through participatory approaches, and I think that's come through quite clearly in today's events. And I do thank all of you for participating. Thank you most of all to ADB for organizing this. Alexandra and Stuart, without your initial thoughts around what this could be and where we've come to, I think we've seen that there's a potential to actually grow this further into with the community expanding around how risk information is actually used. Last but not least, I think from all of us in this space, including those of you who've been part of this journey, a big vinaka level to pandemic, without whom we wouldn't have been able to do this. They've managed the back end of this learning series. Cal Joffrey, your team, vinaka level from us to you, and thank you again, everyone. Please feel free to switch on your cameras, and you can maybe wave everyone goodbye, and hopefully we'll see each other again in a similar space. Do share with us your feedback, please. The survey, do fill that in. It'll help actually shape where to from here.